Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. We love to take on really meaty topics, and today is no different. We're going deep on cybersecurity, but with a specific focus. We're going to be looking at India.
It's a great choice because, honestly, India is becoming a major player on the world stage in their approach to cybersecurity.
Oh,
Well, let's just say it's super fascinating and a little different from what you might expect.
absolutely. And to guide us on this deep dive, we've got this academic paper titled Cybersecurity and Indian Security. It's a bit of a dense read, I'll admit,
Oh, yeah.
but it's packed with really insightful comparisons of how India stacks up against the big guys in the cyber world like the US and China.
It really gets you thinking about some really big concepts, like
Uh,
what does unrestricted warfare even mean in the digital age, and how does something like tech colonialism actually play out in the real world?
okay, so let's jump right in. The paper kicks off by breaking down the cyber strategies of three major players: the US, China, and of course, India. So, first up, the US. They basically leverage their tech giants, Silicon Valley and all that,
Right.
as a key part of their cyber infrastructure. And then you've got agencies like the CIA and CISA adding that extra muscle, that extra layer of security. But their main targets seem to be the usual suspects, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea.
Yeah, the usual suspects. But you got to remember, the U.S. isn't just playing defense here. They're also using their cyber capabilities to, well, let's say, advance their own agenda, which gets a little ethically murky, to be honest.
For sure. Then we have China, and they're not pulling any punches. They've got this doctrine of unrestricted warfare, where cyber attacks are just another tool in the toolbox.
It's like they're taking a page from that ancient Chinese military strategist, Sun Tzu. Remember, winning without fighting? Well, they've adapted that to the digital age.
But here's the thing, they're not just targeting their enemies.
Exactly. Unrestricted warfare in the cyber realm means anything goes. And that includes targeting friends. And they're doing it in peacetime, not just during conflicts.
And the paper gives some pretty shocking examples, like China messing with US gas supplies, and even launching cyber attacks on India's critical infrastructure,
Yeah.
even going after the Prime Minister's office.
Yeah, talk about bold. I mean, attacking another country's most sensitive systems during peacetime. That just shows how seriously they're taking cyber warfare as a tool to gain power. They're aiming to be the top dog in cyber by 2030, and they're putting their money where their mouth is.
It's kind of scary when you think about it. They're investing heavily in AI and all the latest cyber tech. They're playing the long game here, and that should worry any country that relies on digital infrastructure, which is basically everyone these days.
Yeah, that's a good point. So where does all this leave India? Well, according to the paper, they're playing catch-up in this whole cyber arms race.
Yeah.
And it's not just about technology, it's about mindset, too. There's this quote from an Indian Army lieutenant general, and he basically admits that cyber warfare isn't really a big part of their security strategy right now. He even says, and I quote, "India's biggest weakness in cybersecurity is acknowledging this weakness." That's pretty blunt, wouldn't you say?
Wow, yeah, that's pretty direct. So they're acknowledging a gap, but what's the cause of it? I mean, they're a rising power, right?
It's a mix of things.
Yeah.
Part of it's a lack of focus, for sure, but there's also this huge dependence on imported tech, particularly from those same Western tech giants we were just talking about. Think Google, Microsoft, Apple, the whole gang.
And this is where it gets a little tricky for India. They're relying on these companies, but are these companies really following India's rules? The paper really digs into the challenges facing India's Cyber and Information Security Division, which falls under the Ministry of Home Affairs.
Oh, yeah, and they've got their work cut out for them.
They're dealing with a tight budget, not enough skilled personnel, and these cyber threats are just getting more complex by the day.
Definitely a resource problem for sure.
It's like they're trying to fight a wildfire with a garden hose. And the paper doesn't just talk in theory. They give real-world examples of cyber attacks on India's power grid, their telecommunications, even their nuclear power plants.
It's enough to make you sweat, right? These are huge foundational parts of a country, and they're vulnerable. And remember, that attack on the Prime Minister's office we mentioned earlier, it just proves that nobody is really immune to cyber attacks in this day and age.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if a country like India, with all its ambitions to be a global leader, can't even secure its own systems, how can they really project power on the world stage? It's a fundamental question.
It is, and the paper uses this phrase, tech colonialism, to describe what's happening. This idea that being too reliant on foreign tech, especially for something as important as cybersecurity, can actually limit a country's independence. They can even become vulnerable to manipulation.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Like, in this rush to embrace all the cool new tech, are we all becoming a little too dependent on these big tech companies without really understanding the risks involved? And what does that mean for countries like India that are trying to make their mark on the world?
Big questions for sure.
It's something to think about, and we'll be diving deeper into these questions as we continue our exploration.
So it sounds like India's got some work to do, right? But the paper's not all doom and gloom. It does point to some positive steps that they're taking, like setting up the Defense Cyber Agency back in 2019.
Okay, so they formed this new agency, but is that really enough to protect India in the cyber world? I mean, things are moving so fast.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the paper seems to think India needs to step up their game. Right now, they've got these separate cyber divisions within the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Ministry of Finance.
So they're spread out.
Exactly. And what they really need is a much more centralized approach, like one main agency that's in charge of everything cybersecurity.
So you're saying they need a sort of cyber czar, someone who can really coordinate a national strategy and make sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And this agency would need to answer directly to the Prime Minister, making it clear that cybersecurity is a top priority. The paper even suggests looking at models like the US CIS or the Chinese Strategic Force Command. These agencies have real power, real resources, and they can act quickly when attacks happen.
Makes sense. If you're going to fight a war, you need a clear chain of command. But it's one thing to create an agency, it's another to give it the teeth it needs to actually do something, right?
Absolutely. This new agency wouldn't be effective without proper funding and a skilled workforce. We're talking about going up against state-sponsored hackers, cyber criminals, sophisticated actors, and you need the best people and the best tech to stand a chance.
I can't even imagine what that kind of talent pool would look like. I mean, it's got to be so specialized and competitive.
Oh, it is, and that's why attracting and retaining those experts is a huge challenge for any country. But India's got another potential ace up their sleeve: artificial intelligence. The paper actually highlights how India has a lot of potential in the AI field.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so they've got this national AI portal, AI committees, they've even set up AI labs. So they're making moves, at least on the tech development front.
They are. But, and this is a big but, the paper raises a really critical point. While India is investing in AI, they don't seem to be focusing enough on securing those AI systems themselves.
Isn't that a little ironic, like building a fortress but leaving the gate wide open?
Exactly. And it points to this fundamental principle of cybersecurity. You're only as strong as your weakest link. If India is building all this amazing AI but not securing it properly, they're just creating new vulnerabilities that hackers can exploit.
So they have the tools but not the locks for the toolbox. That's a problem.
It is. And this is where the geopolitical dynamics come into play. Because the paper doesn't just look at India in isolation. It frames the competition between China and India as this struggle for power, not just in cyberspace, but for dominance in Asia and on the world stage. It goes way back, to historical tensions and rivalries.
So you're saying it's more than just a tech race. It's got these deeper historical and political undercurrents driving the rivalry between China and India.
Exactly. And in that context, cyber warfare becomes just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The paper talks about how China has been using its cyber capabilities for all sorts of things. Think psychological operations, election meddling, spreading disinformation. They're even trying to influence journalists.
Wow, it's kind of unsettling to think about how sophisticated these tactics are. And how does India's approach compare to China's?
Well, that's where the difference is really striking. China's being very proactive and often aggressive, while India seems to be more reactive and defensive. The paper basically argues that this needs to change if India wants to compete in this new cyber age.
Okay, so let's say India wants to shift from defense to offense. How do they do that? What's the roadmap?
Well, the key takeaway from the paper is that India needs a more holistic cybersecurity strategy, not just reacting to attacks as they happen. They need to start thinking about how to deter adversaries, how to prevent attacks in the first place.
Prevention is key. Like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. It's about having a plan, being prepared, and knowing how to respond swiftly and decisively if an attack does happen. It's like a giant, constantly moving puzzle.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a headache just thinking about it. It's a lot to juggle, for sure.
It is, but this is why research like this paper is so important. It helps us understand the complexity of the issue and start thinking about solutions. Because it's not just an academic exercise. This stuff has real-world consequences for everyone, not just for India.
It's global, it's connected, and it's changing all the time.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity is no longer just a tech issue. It's about national and international security. And as technology keeps advancing, these challenges are only going to get tougher and more urgent.
Yeah, and as we become more and more reliant on technology, these cyber threats are going to hit closer to home for all of us.
It's true, and it's something we all need to be aware of. So we've talked a lot about the threats and challenges, but what's the takeaway? What's the paper's message about India's future in this whole cyber game?
Well, I think if anything's clear, it's that India's reliance on foreign tech, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, is a huge problem if they want to be a truly powerful player on the global stage. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? They're trying to become this tech powerhouse, but they're kind of stuck relying on others for protection.
Yeah, it's like a catch-22 almost.
Yeah.
And the paper pulls no punches, using this term tech colonialism, to describe what could happen if India doesn't take this seriously.
Tech colonialism. That's a pretty scary thought. It's like, instead of colonizing land, now countries are colonizing technology and data.
It's a new kind of power dynamic, that's for sure. And it raises some big questions for a lot of countries, not just India. How do you balance embracing global technology with protecting your own interests and independence? It's a tough line to walk.
So what's the solution? How can India avoid becoming a victim of this tech colonialism? What does the paper suggest?
It goes beyond just throwing money at the problem or setting up new agencies. The paper says India needs to fundamentally change how they think about cybersecurity. It can't just be an afterthought. It has to be a core part of their national strategy, intertwined with their economic and political goals.
So it's got to be woven into the fabric of their national identity almost, right?
Right, and that might mean making some tough choices. Investing in their own tech development, building up their domestic cybersecurity industry, even rethinking their relationships with those Western tech giants.
So taking control of their own digital destiny, basically.
Exactly. And that's not easy, especially in today's interconnected world. But the paper makes a strong argument that it's essential if India wants to be a leader, not a follower, in this new world where cyber power is everything.
This has been a real eye-opener. It's amazing how cybersecurity touches on so many different aspects of our lives. It's not just about computers and code anymore. It's about economics, politics, and even national security.
It's a whole new battleground, and the stakes are higher than ever.
Yeah.
And that's why we got to keep talking about it, keep learning, and keep pushing for solutions.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, right? And the more we know about these issues, the better prepared we'll be to face them head on.
And it's not just about governments and big tech companies either. We can all do our part. Be mindful of what we share online, support companies that value privacy, and demand stronger data protection laws.
It's like every little bit helps to make the digital world a safer place.
That's the spirit. And who knows? Maybe some of our listeners will be inspired to become the next generation of cybersecurity experts, helping to build a more secure future for everyone.
Now there's a thought. Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into cybersecurity and India. We've learned a lot about the threats, the challenges, and the opportunities. But most importantly, we've seen how this issue is connected to so many other aspects of our world.
It's a complex landscape, that's for sure. But it's one that we all need to be aware of and engaged in because the future of cybersecurity is, well, it's really the future of all of us.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Remember, the digital world is always evolving, so stay curious, stay engaged, and stay safe out there. And if you come across any interesting research on cybersecurity, send it our way. We love to geek out on this stuff.
Absolutely. We're always up for another deep dive.
Until next time, stay vigilant and keep those firewalls strong.